7 years ago, a woman I was supposed to marry left a note on a flour-dusted counter and walked out before the sun came up. 4 sentences. I read them once and then I spent the next 7 years believing every single word. Then, at 2:14 on a Tuesday morning, while my ovens were still climbing to temperature and the whole town was asleep, someone knocked 3 times on the back door of my bakery. I opened it expecting the kid who drops off the milk. It was her. Soaked through, thinner than I remembered, holding a brown paper bag against her chest like it was the only thing she still owned. And before I could even get her name out of my mouth, she said 6 words, "I am still not over. I just need one night, please." Before I tell you what I did, I have to tell you who I was before she knocked. Because the man who opened that door was not the man who proposed to her, and he wasn't really the man who survived her leaving either. He was something carved out of both of them. Quieter, harder in the places that used to be soft. My name is Eli Brandt. I'm 38. I bake bread for a living, which means I live my life in reverse from the rest of the world. I go to work when other people are pouring a last glass of wine, and I'm pulling the final tray out of the oven when they're hitting snooze for the first time. My bakery sits at the bottom of a hill in a small harbor town in Maine, the kind of place where the fog rolls in like it pays rent and where everyone knows your business but is too polite to say so to your face. The bakery is called First Light. I didn't name it alone. When I was 31, I was in love with a woman named Tessa Hale, and the two of us had a plan so specific it almost felt rude to the universe. We had found an empty storefront that used to be a hardware store with good bones and terrible plumbing, and a back room exactly the right size for 2 ovens. We had a name, we had a starter, and I'll explain about the starter, because it matters more than anything else in this story. We had a lease, a loan, a paint color we'd argued about for 3 weeks, and a date circled on a calendar for our grand opening. We were going to bake through the night so the whole town could wake up to fresh bread. First Light. That was the whole idea. That was us. The starter, then. My grandmother's name was Opal, and she kept a sourdough starter alive in her kitchen for longer than I was alive. It was a living thing, technically. Wild yeast and flour and water and thyme, fed every single day, passed from her hands to my mother's and finally to mine. When Tessa and I started planning First Light, I gave that starter a name, because Tess insisted that anything you feed every day deserves a name. We called it June, because that was the month my grandmother died, and because Tessa said June sounded like someone who'd outlive us all. 2 weeks before we were supposed to open, Tessa Hale disappeared. I came in at 4 in the morning to start the first proof, and the lights were off, which they shouldn't have been. There was a note on the counter, weighed down by the metal dough scraper she always used. 4 sentences. I have them memorized the way you memorize the worst thing anyone ever said to you. I want more than flour and early mornings. I took my half. Don't come looking. There's nothing to find. I'm sorry, Eli. I took my half. That's the part that did it. Our savings account, the cushion we'd built to keep the place afloat through the first lean months, it was gone. She'd emptied it. The loan for the build-out was still there, of course, with both our names on it, except now there was only one of us to carry it. So I carried it, alone. I won't dress up what that year was. I opened First Light 2 weeks late and badly underfunded, and I worked 19-hour days, because I couldn't afford to hire anyone, and I sold every loaf with a smile while the bank sent me letters that made my hands shake. I almost lost it twice. The town kept me alive. Honestly, Mrs. Peterson buying 6 rolls she didn't need, the harbor crew showing up at dawn for coffee they could have made at home. I dug out 1 quarter at a time. By year 3, I was breathing. By year 5, I was actually fine, and the whole time I kept feeding June. That's the part I can't fully explain even now. The smart thing, the clean thing, would have been to let that starter die. It was the last living piece of the dream Tessa walked out on. Every morning I should have poured it down the drain and started fresh. Instead, every single day for 7 years I fed it. Flour, water, thyme, and I hated myself a little each time I did it, because keeping it alive meant I hadn't actually let her go. I'd just stopped admitting it. I told myself I'd built something out of her leaving, and I believed the 4 sentences completely. I want more than flower and early mornings. She got tired of the small life. She got tired of me. She took the money and chose herself. It was simple. It was a story I could stand on. Then she knocked. I want to be honest about the first thing I felt when I saw her, because it wasn't tender. It was something closer to vertigo. 7 years of a story I'd built brick by brick, and it all tilted sideways in the doorway. She looked terrible, and I mean that with love. Her dark hair was plastered to her face from the rain. She had a thin jacket that was no match for a Maine April. There were lines near her eyes that hadn't been there before, and she was holding that paper bag against her chest with both hands like a shield. Tessa, I said, just her name. It came out flat. I know, she said. I know exactly what you're thinking, and you're right to think it. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to talk. I'm asking for one night. In your kitchen. That's all. And then I'll go, and you'll never have to see me again. The rain was coming down hard behind her. The smart thing, the thing that protected the man I'd built, was to say no. Close the door. Go back to my dough and pretend the door had never opened. I had a buyer coming in 9 hours, and I think that mattered to what happened next, so let me tell you that part too. I was selling First Light. The papers were on my office desk, half-signed. A couple from Portland with more money than they knew what to do with wanted a charming coastal bakery, and I'd decided I was done. 7 years was enough. The dream had soured into a job, and the job had soured into a habit, and I figured I'd sell the whole thing, including the equipment, including June, and start over somewhere that didn't smell like the worst year of my life. The buyers were coming at 11 to do a final walkthrough and sign. So when Tessa stood in my doorway asking for one night in a kitchen I was about to hand to strangers, some part of me thought, this is the last night anyway. It's already an ending. What's one more? I stepped back and held the door. She came in fast, the way you move when you're afraid the offer might get rescinded. She stood dripping on my floor, taking in the kitchen, the long steel tables, the 2 ovens, the proofing shelves, the whole quiet little world I'd built without her. I watched her eyes find the crock on the back shelf, the one with the masking tape label gone soft and yellow with age, the one that said, in handwriting that used to be hers, June. She made a sound I can't really describe, not a word, just air leaving her. You kept her alive, she said. It would have been a waste of good flour to start over, I said, which was a lie we both heard land. She set the paper bag down on the steel table very carefully, like it was full of eggs. Can I show you what I need to do, she asked. And then, if you still want me gone, I'll go and I won't say another word about anything. What's in the bag, Tessa? She opened it. Inside was a worn spiral notebook, the cover bloated and rippled the way paper gets when it's been wet and dried 100 times, and underneath it, a second crock, smaller than mine, with its own crust of dried starter around the rim. It's a recipe, she said, and it's not finished, and I have spent 7 years trying to finish it, and I can't. Not anywhere else. Not in any other kitchen. It has to be this one. I'll explain all of it, but Eli, the dough won't wait, and I have until your buyer comes, so will you let me start? I should have asked a dozen questions right there. How did you know I had a buyer? What recipe? Why this kitchen? Where the hell have you been for 7 years? Instead, I looked at her hands, which were already moving toward the flour bin out of pure muscle memory, the way mine do, and I heard myself say the most dangerous word I know. Start. We baked. That's the strange thing I keep coming back to. For the first hour, we barely spoke because there's a rhythm to a kitchen that 2 people who once shared one never really lose. She knew where everything was, even 7 years later. Even though I'd moved half of it, she'd reach for the scale and it would be exactly where her hand expected it not to be, and she'd adjust without comment, and we'd keep going. She fed her starter. I watched her do it. Same motion my grandmother used, same motion I use, the gentle fold, the listen with your eyes for the bubbles. And I understood slowly that her starter and mine were the same age. 7 years old, born the same season. You made your own June, I said. I made my own June, she agreed, not looking up. From a pinch of the original. I took a little when I left. I didn't take the money to be cruel, Eli. But I took a pinch of the starter because I couldn't survive taking nothing of you. You took $11,000, I said. The number had lived in my chest for 7 years, and it came out sharper than I meant it to. She flinched but didn't argue. I know exactly how much I took to the dollar. She wiped her hands on a towel and reached back into the bag and pulled out an envelope, thick, taped shut, and set it on the table between us next to the notebook. That's all of it. With 7 years of what the bank would have charged in interest, because I did the math, and because I didn't want to give you back less than I cost you, I've been carrying that envelope around for 8 months, trying to work up the nerve to drive here. I didn't touch it. You think this is about the money, I said. No, she said. I think the money is the only part of this I actually know how to fix. The rest of it I've been too much of a coward to even attempt. She took a breath. Can I tell you the truth now? The whole thing? And then you can hate me with better information if you still want to. The dough was resting. The ovens were warm. Outside, the rain had softened to that fine Maine mist that isn't really falling so much as hanging there. I leaned against the steel table and crossed my arms and said, Tell me. Here is the truth, she told me, in the order she told it, in a kitchen at 3 in the morning. Tessa had a younger brother named Cole. I'd met him a handful of times back then, a sweet, scattered kid. A few years younger, the family screw-up in the way that some families assign one person that role and never let them out of it. 7 years ago, 2 weeks before our opening, Cole called Tessa from a hospital in Boston. He was sick. Not the kind of sick you wait out. There was a heart thing, a congenital defect nobody had caught that had quietly been getting worse his whole life, and it had finally announced itself, and a surgeon told him he had a window. A real surgery, a hard one, expensive, and there was a specialist, and there was a slot. And the slot was in 11 days, and after that the specialist was leaving the country for a year, and Cole's odds dropped through the floor if he waited. The surgery, the part insurance fought, the travel, the recovery, it came to a little over $11,000 they didn't have. Cole didn't have it. Their parents were gone. Tessa had exactly one pile of money in the world, ours. I knew what you would do, she said. Her voice was very steady now, the steadiness of something rehearsed in the dark 1,000 times. I knew you, Eli. If I came to you and told you, you would have written the check before I finished the sentence. You wouldn't have hesitated for 1 second. And then we'd have had no cushion, an opening in 2 weeks, a loan we couldn't service, and you would have lost first light trying to save my brother. I knew it the way I know my own name. You would have given a man you'd met 3 times the entire dream just because I asked, and it would have ruined you. So you should have asked me, I said. My throat hurt. You should have given me the chance to ruin myself. That was mine to give. I know that now. A tear went down her face and she let it. I knew it then too, honestly. But Cole begged me. He was so ashamed. He made me swear I wouldn't tell you, because he couldn't stand the idea of being the reason you lost everything. And she pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes. I made a calculation. I decided I could save my brother and save your bakery if I just took one of them off the board. Me. If I disappeared, you'd be furious, but fury is survivable. You'd hate me, but hate doesn't bankrupt you. You'd open 2 weeks late and broke, but you'd open. You'd have a reason to fight. If I'd told you the truth, you'd have followed me to Boston and emptied your accounts in that waiting room, and I couldn't let you do that. So I took the money, and I wrote you the cruelest 4 sentences I could think of, on purpose, so that you would let me go and never come looking. The note, I want more than flour and early mornings. You wrote that on purpose, I said. I wrote 11 drafts, she said. The early ones were honest, and they were full of love, and I tore them up because love would have made you come after me. I needed you to believe I'd chosen myself. I needed you to think the worst, because the worst was the only version that kept you here, kept the bakery alive, kept you out of that hospital draining your life into my family's mess. So I picked the 4 sentences most likely to make you stop loving me, and I left them on the counter, and I drove to Boston, and I held my brother's hand while they took him into surgery, and the whole time I thought about you reading those words and I wanted to die. I had to put my hand flat on the steel table. The room had gone strange. Cole lived, she said. He's 31 now. He coaches a middle school baseball team in Vermont. He has a daughter. He named her after our mother. She laughed and it broke in the middle. He's alive, Eli. He's completely, ordinarily alive. And he has been for 7 years, and every single day of those 7 years I have known exactly what it cost. It cost you. It cost us. And I let it because I decided I got to make that choice for both of us. That's the part I can't forgive myself for. Not the leaving, the deciding. I want to tell you that I crossed the kitchen and held her. That's how it goes in the version I've replayed since. But that's not what happened, because I am not a man who recovers quickly, and 7 years is a long time to build a wall, and a wall does not come down because someone finally tells you why they built it. What I actually did was ask the hardest question I had. Why now? I said. Cole's been fine for 7 years. The money's been ready for 8 months. Why are you standing in my kitchen at 3 in the morning tonight? She looked at the half-signed sale papers, which I hadn't mentioned, which I'd never mentioned. Because the woman from Portland posted about it, she said quietly. She's so excited. She put up pictures. Buying a darling little Maine bakery, wish us luck, closing this week. And I saw your sign in the background of one of the photos. First Light, the name we picked. She swallowed. I'd told myself you were better off all these years. That you'd moved on, that you were happy, that showing up would just be me reopening a wound for my own relief. And then I saw you were selling it. You were selling the thing we built, and I realized that if you signed those papers, the last living piece of us, June the name, all of it, would belong to strangers who didn't know it was anything more than a cute store, and I couldn't let that happen without you, at least knowing the truth first. You deserved to make that decision with all the information. I owed you that. It's the one thing I could still give you that I'd taken away 7 years ago. The truth before the door closes. So that's what the recipe is, I said slowly, understanding finally. The unfinished one. She nodded and opened the bloated notebook to a page near the back and turned it so I could see. It was a bread, a specific one. Half the page was her handwriting from 7 years ago, and the other half was a mess of crossed-out attempts, dated from kitchens all over the country. A loaf we'd been developing together the spring before everything fell apart. Our loaf, the one we'd planned to open with, we'd never finished it. We'd been one ingredient short of right, one technique away, and then she was gone, and I'd never had the heart to touch it again. I've been trying to finish it for 7 years, she said. In every kitchen I've worked in, and it's never right, and I finally understood why. It was never about the recipe. It needs this kitchen. It needs this starter. It needs you. It was always a 2-person loaf, and I tried to make it alone, the same way I tried to fix everything alone, and that was the whole mistake of my life in one stupid piece of bread. She wiped her face. So that's the one night I'm asking for. Let me finish our loaf in our kitchen before you give it away. And then I'll leave the money and the truth. And I'll go, and the woman from Portland will never know any of it. You'll have closed it properly. We both will. We finished the loaf. I'm not going to pretend I can make bread sound like a thunderclap, but I'll tell you that something happened in that kitchen between 3 and 6 in the morning that I don't have a better word for than repair. We worked the dough together, her hands and mine, and we found the thing we'd been missing all those years ago. It was so small, an overnight cold ferment we'd been too impatient for back when we were young, and broke, and rushing toward an opening. 7 years had given us both the one ingredient the recipe needed, which was patience, which is a thing you cannot buy and cannot fake and can only earn by losing enough to learn it. We talked the whole time, not about forgiveness, about Cole's daughter, about the year I almost lost the place, about my grandmother, about the 11 drafts of the note, about the towns she'd lived in, and the men she hadn't married, and the way she fed her starter every morning, thinking about whether I was still feeding mine. 2 people who'd been frozen mid-sentence for 7 years, finally finishing the conversation. When the loaf came out of the oven, the sun was coming up over the harbor. First light, the actual thing. The fog had burned off and the water had gone gold and the whole kitchen Smelled like the best version of a life I'd convinced myself I didn't want anymore. We cut it. We ate it standing up, the way you eat the best bread, the crust still too hot, butter melting before it hit the plate. It was perfect. I'm not being romantic. It was technically on the merits, the best loaf I have ever made, and I did not make it alone. Tessa set down her piece and looked at me and said, "Thank you for one night. You can sign your papers. I'll get out of your way." And I looked at the envelope of money and the finished recipe and the woman across the table whose worst decision had been made out of the deepest love I'd ever been on the receiving end of, and I finally understood the thing that had been hiding in plain sight for 7 years. I'd kept June alive, every single day. When the smart thing was to let it die, I'd fed it. I'd told myself it was about not wasting flour, about stubbornness, about 100 things that weren't the truth. The truth was the same truth Tessa had been living, that you do not feed a thing every day for 7 years, unless some part of you is still hoping it will be needed again. "The buyers come at 11, I said. "I know. I'm going to call them and tell them the bakery's not for sale." She went very still. "Ellie, you don't have to do that because of me. I didn't come here to—" "I know why you came here," I said. "And it isn't because of you. It's because I've spent 7 years pretending I built something out of you leaving, when the truth is I just kept the lights on while I waited to find out if it was real. And now I know. So I'm not doing this for you." I picked up the envelope and pressed it back into her hands. "And keep your money. Put it in a college fund for Cole's kid." The bakery survived. We both know it didn't need it in the end. What it needed was you to walk back through that door, and you finally did. She cried then, properly. The kind that's been held for 7 years. And I crossed the kitchen. And that time I did hold her, and neither of us said anything, because the bread was still warm, and the sun was up, and some things don't need narrating. I'd love to tell you we got married the next week. We didn't. We're not those people, and that wouldn't be the true version, and I'm done with anything that isn't the true version. What actually happened is this. I called the couple from Portland and apologized and offered hard to help them find another place, which I eventually did. There's a great spot 2 towns over, and they're thriving, and they send me a card every Christmas. Tessa got a room above the hardware store turned bakery, her own space, her own door, because 7 years of damage doesn't undo itself overnight, and we both knew it. We took it slow, painfully slow. The kind of slow where you have to keep choosing it on purpose every single morning, like feeding a starter. She started baking at first light again. We changed the sign to add a second line under the name, Est, the second time properly. The regulars never asked what it meant. The ones who'd been around 7 years ago knew. Cole came up that summer with his daughter, and I met the kid Tessa's brother had nearly died to become a father to. And he shook my hand and couldn't look at me, and I told him the same thing I'd told his sister, that the bakery survived, and that I was glad he had too, and that the math of it had worked out in the only way that mattered. He cried in my walk-in cooler for 10 minutes, and then we made bread. A year after the night she knocked, I asked Tessa to marry me. Not in front of a crowd, not with a speech. At 4 in the morning, in the kitchen, while we were folding the cold ferment for our loaf, the one that's on the menu now, the one we sell out of every single day, the one we just call First Light, with no other description, because the people in this town already know the whole story. I asked her with flour on both our hands. She said yes before I finished and then accused me of timing it so she couldn't run. She wasn't entirely wrong. I'd learned a thing or two about why people run. We keep 2 starters going now. Mine and the one she made from a stolen pinch 7 years ago in a hospital cafeteria fridge in Boston, while her brother was in surgery. Same age, same blood, technically. We feed them side by side every morning, and once a month we fold a little of each into the other, so that neither of them is ever fully one thing or fully the other anymore. Tessa says that's the most honest description of a marriage she's ever found. I think she's right. People ask how we got together, and Tessa always says the same thing. I knocked on his door in the rain and asked for one night, and then I always add the part she leaves out, and then she gave back the 7 years she'd been caring for both of us. The night was never the gift, the truth was. So that's the whole story. Or the beginning of the real one, depending on how you look at it. I used to believe that love was a thing you could read in 4 sentences on a counter and understand completely. I was wrong about that for 7 years. The truest things in my life never announced themselves in plain language. They showed up soaked through at 2 in the morning, holding a paper bag, asking for something small because they were too afraid to ask for the thing they actually needed. And the only thing they needed from me, in the end, was a door that opened and an oven that was already warm. Now let me ask you, because I really do want to know, what would you have done if someone you spent 7 years hating knocked on your door before sunrise and asked for one night, and you had every reason in the world to say no? And have you ever found out, far too late, that the person you were sure had betrayed you had actually been protecting you the whole time, in the only clumsy, devastating way they knew how? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.